Climate ambition and climate finance are two sides of the same coin. You cannot achieve your goals of climate ambition unless it is backed by money and resources going into climate change technologies. We are better prepared to manage the changes or bear the losses that climate change can bring about. Climate finance is nothing but money coming from all sorts of sources, whether government or private, domestic or international. Any money coming from anywhere is climate finance. In order to justify, that means I did not create this mess. Developing countries say I did not create this mess. Why should I bear for the impact of it? Now, like I showed you, this is the global climate finance architecture. Okay, in 2022, carbon markets were to the tune of $900 billion. That is almost $1 trillion. Everyone keeps talking about climate change. Everyone keeps mentioning that there is a rise in extreme weather events around the world. But who is asking the uncomfortable question? Who is paying for all of this? With this question, today we dive straight into the world of climate finance. When we hear news such as the developing world needs $1.3 trillion every year to meet its climate ambitions. The new collective quantified goal has risen to $300 billion every year. All these terms, all these words, these numbers sound very confusing. So today we are going to discuss who pays who, how much, and why. But the most important question that has to be answered today is why? Why do we need money to deal with climate change? Climate ambition and climate finance are two sides of the same coin. You cannot achieve your goals of climate ambition unless it is backed by money and resources going into climate change technologies. To give you an example, Bangladesh in 1970 was devastated by a cyclone called Bhola, in which almost 3 lakh people lost their lives. Let's move fast forward to today. You will realize that in 2023, a similar cyclone, Mocha, just led to 3 casualties. This shows that over a period of time, investing money, resources into disaster preparedness, early warning systems actually leads to adaptation of climate change. That means we are better prepared to manage the changes or bear the losses that climate change can bring about. And which is why it is extremely important for us to deal with climate finance, which is now in fact the most sticking point in all the climate negotiations. So what is climate finance? The term climate finance, what does it actually mean? If I take a typical definition out of the textbook, it would say climate finance is funding from public, private, and alternative sources that support actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and cope with climate change impact and adaptation. Fine. But let me simplify this for you. Understand it like this. Climate finance is nothing but money coming from all sorts of sources, whether government or private, domestic or international. Any money coming from anywhere is climate finance. But it is primarily channeled into 3 types of activities. What are those activities? Number 1 is mitigation. That means activities which are aimed at reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. So we are preventing further climate change, further global rise in average global temperatures. Second is adaptation, where we are building resilience. For example, let's say we are setting up early warning systems for cyclones, or we are raising sea walls across the shore so that we can be better prepared for sea level rise. All these activities come under adaptation. And the third category is loss and damage. This deals with after disaster situations. So rescue, relief, rehabilitation, reconstruction, all these activities come under the ambit of loss and damage. Now we know where the money, how is it going. But the question is, who is paying to whom? Yes, the answer we broadly know is that developed countries are paying to developing countries. But the question is, why are they paying? What is it that the developed countries have done over the years that has made them responsible for this? And the answer to that lies in the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. The principle of common but differentiated responsibility clearly establishes the fact that developed countries have a historical responsibility towards climate change. Why? Because A, they industrialized early, and B, because they are responsible for majority of the cumulative, that is the total emissions that have taken place in the world till now. Climate change is a factor of cumulative emissions and not current emissions, which is why the developed countries are more and more responsible for their actions that have been done in the past, let's say 200 or 300 odd years. The next reason is unequal capacity. Developed countries have the right resources. That means they have strong institutions. They have the correct fiscal resources to deal with this. Whereas developing countries, on the other hand, are still marred with dealing with problems like poverty alleviation. We still have infrastructure deficits. We still do not have enough fiscal space to fit in climate change ambition. And this is why the developed countries have a more important role to play. The third point is climate justice. If I talk about climate justice, that means that while the action, the historical actions of cumulative emissions of developed countries have been higher, the burden or the impact on the developing countries is disproportionately higher. That means developing countries are actually more vulnerable and they are bearing the major brunt of climate change, which the developed countries are not. So, in order to justify, that means I did not create this mess. Developing countries say, I did not create this mess. Why should I bear for the impact of it? And that is why it is the moral and ethical responsibility of the developed countries to finance the climate ambitions of the entire world. And in this context, we also understand it as finance is not a donation. The developed world is not giving charity. It is not a donation. It is an obligation on their part to provide resources to the developing world to deal with the impact of climate change. Now let's understand certain things about common but differentiated responsibility. We have learned the fact that common but differentiated responsibility is a concept that has been widely accepted, and especially it started with the conference on Rio Summit 1992, which is also known as the Earth Summit. Under this conference, under Article 9, it was clearly established that the developed countries have to pay money to the developing countries for dealing with climate change. And in this same context also, the modalities or how that will happen were discussed under the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. Now let's go a little further and understand how the global climate finance architecture works. If you look at the global climate finance architecture, it looks very complicated and haphazard. It looks like there are so many bodies, so many agencies. But what we need to understand or see the big picture is that here there is a list of developed countries, which are the main donor countries or from where the money is flowing. These are the different channels or conduits through which the money will reach finally the developing countries. So if you look at the total demand and supply gap, the world currently needs about 5 to 7 trillion dollars every year, especially 2030s onwards. This is the estimate that we currently need about 5 to 7 trillion dollars every year to deal with the impact of climate change. And this is the total demand of the total world, whether developing or developed. However, currently the actual inflows into climate related projects, climate investments, is currently only to the tune of 2 trillion. And remember, this is a figure which is talking about the entire world, public money, private money, international, domestic, all sorts of money. So the entire world currently is spending at the moment about $2 trillion every year for climate related projects. Now, what's important here to understand is that how does this money move? How does this international or cross-border movement of money take place? Now, like I showed you, this is the global climate finance architecture, okay? And in this architecture, you can see that there is the developed world. That means there are countries, developed countries. Under them are different agencies, domestic agencies, their own government bodies. So for example, under US, we have the USAID. This is a development arm, international development arm, finance arm, which funds projects outside, let's say, US. Similarly, you have JICA under Japan. So all these agencies which work under their respective sovereign governments, they channel funds to the developing countries. Now, these are funds which are owned by the developing countries through mainly 3 conduits. What are the 3 conduits? Look at it like a water pipeline. The first conduit is the UNF CCC mechanism. That means that money or that funding which is coming from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Under the UNF CCC, we have funds like Green Climate Fund, Global Environment Facility, we have Adaptation Fund, Least Developed Countries Fund, so on and so forth. So there are other different many funds which are a part of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now remember, under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the main agreement, that is the Paris Agreement, mentions about Article 6. And Article 6 primarily deals with the different ways in which countries can help each other in achieving their climate goals. So one pipe that we see is through the UNF CCC mechanism. The other conduit that works for developed countries through which they send money to the developing countries is the non-UNF CCC mechanisms. Now, non-UNF CCC mechanisms include agencies like the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, other important multilateral development banks. So we call them MDBs, primarily MDBs. This is the second conduit through which the developed countries give money to the developing countries. Now, what is the advantage here? The advantage here is that this is a relatively easier channel to get money from, especially for the developing countries. Why? Because under UNF CCC negotiations, all the rules are determined by the Conference of Parties. It is very rule-based, it is very strict. The projects are cross-verified by United Nations. So it is as if the UNF CCC is acting like a brokerage or a broker here between all sorts of negotiations. But in this case, it is simple. If India wants to implement, let's say we want to implement a solar park or we want to set up a solar park in India, the government of India will get in touch with the World Bank, and World Bank can distribute funds in the form of, let's say, loans. Loans could be concessional, non-concessional, or grants to give away that project. So here the regulation by UNFCCC is not so strict, which is why majority of the funding, climate funding, is actually happening through this channel. Okay. And the third is risk and insurance. Risk and insurance is a completely different domain. Just understand it like this, that this deals with mostly insurance-based projects, those kind of activities. So this is the third channel through which the money is flowing to the developing world. Now for our purposes, it is very important to understand that what is the importance of Article 6. But before I proceed to Article 6, that means what is the mechanism through which we get money in UNFCCC, let us just take a quick look on where the money is coming from. Who is giving? Is it only the governments which are giving money, or is it some other institutions that are giving money? We can take a quick understanding of that. Globally, if I break up the source of climate finance source can be divided into primarily two categories. Look at it like this. Whoever is spending, it is very territorial in nature. Just like GDP, if you are spending that money in your own country, that will be considered domestic spending. So that domestic spending could be done by government, or it could be done by a private entity. So for example, domestic private finance. For example, let's say in India, Adani Green or Tata Power decide to set up a solar park in India. That solar park in India, that means that would come under domestic private finance. Currently, most of the money, 50 to 50% of the money that is coming into climate finance is actually coming through this source. Similarly, domestic public finance. For example, if the Solar Energy Corporation of India decides to set up a solar park in India, but this is a PSU, this is backed by government. So around 25 to 30% of the money that is traveling in the world is coming from domestic public finance. That means countries, their own sovereign governments are financing to the tune of 25 to 30%. Now, once this is all within the territory of your country, that is within your own country, rest of the money, this is almost to the tune of 80 to 85%. So if you see climate finance, we remember the $2 trillion is already being invested. Of that $2 trillion, 80 to 85 is only coming from country to its own country. There is only about 10 to 15% or 15 to 20% of money which is actually traveling internationally. Only 15 to 20% of the world's money is traveling internationally, that is coming from the developed countries to the developing countries. And international, again, you can divide it into public. Public means, that means it is coming from the governments, like we saw in the last picture, the architecture. It could be coming through UNFCCC funds, it could be coming through bilateral negotiations if India has a direct, let's say, association with JICA, or we get money from USAID, or it could be coming from the multilateral development banks like World Bank, Asian Development Banks. So all this is a very small component of where actually the money is flowing. And finally, international private finance. So for example, if a European investment fund wants to invest money in, let's say, green bonds in India, or through FDI in India, that would be counted as international private finance. So this gives you a sense, an idea of how much share of money is coming from what. The domestic has the major chunk. Most of the climate finance is domestic and it is private in nature. It is not coming from the governments. So we have understood what are the sources, where the sources of money is coming from. Broadly, if I have to divide it, I can divide it into public finance, multilateral institutions, private money, and finally carbon markets. Carbon market means this is open-ended markets such as stock markets on which carbon credits are traded. Bulk of the world's money is not coming from these sources, but in fact carbon markets. In 2022, carbon markets were to the tune of $900 billion. That is almost $1 trillion. So majority of the money in the world is actually moving here and not here or here. So this clarity is very, very important. Now that I speak of carbon markets, let me take a quick detour to help you understand what are carbon credits and how carbon markets function. Very simply, carbon market is like an exchange, market is like an exchange of commodity. So carbon markets are created with the concept of setting a cap or allocated emissions that a particular industry or a country or an emitter makes. This is the limit that has been set. Once this limit is set, there will be certain emitters that will be emitting above greenhouse gas emissions above that limit, and some may be doing it less. The ones who are doing it less earn carbon credits for their lesser emissions, and this carbon credits can be sold to the ones who are emitting higher. So an artificial market is created where there is actually no commodity, but the fact that there are reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So certified emission reductions, all these terms that you hear, carbon offset, these all come from this concept. That means reduced emissions. Generally, the principle is that 1 carbon credit equals to 1 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent greenhouse gases removed. Now the question is, who issues these carbon credits? The answer is, it depends. If the contract is being done under the aegis of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, it is the UN agency which will issue the carbon credit. If the interaction is bilateral, only between country to country, then maybe the host country, for example, India, can issue carbon credits. Okay? And similarly, there is a third resource, which is private registries. So sometimes what happens, let's say a country or somebody has set up a renewable energy plant or energy park. There will be a third party auditor who will come and review the plant or the park, assess how much emissions have reduced on account of setting up of this park, and then he will give the information to a certified registry, and this registry will issue carbon credits, which in turn can be traded in the market. So this is how carbon credits are generated and how this is how they are traded. Now, for our understanding, we discussed the global finance architecture. We know there is developed countries and developing countries. They are giving money through UNFCCC, other non-UNFCCC mechanisms. Within the UNFCCC, I told you about Article 6. Article 6, that is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Article 6 tells the countries, that is the parties or the conference of parties to the convention, that how you can achieve your nationally determined contributions. Because under the Paris Agreement of UNFCCC, all countries have voluntarily contributed that, okay, this is my pledge, this is how much I am going to reduce my emissions by so and so time. So for example, in the case of India, in COP, the Glasgow COP, India came up with the Panchamrit pledge, in which it said we will reduce our carbon, we will generate 500 gigawatts of energy from non-fossil fuels. 50% of our energy requirements will be met by renewable energy. We will become a net zero economy by 2070 and so on and so forth. So 5 pledges were made by Government of India in the form of nationally determined contributions. Now Government of India has to achieve those contributions. So that is done under the Article 6 of the UNFCCC mechanism, but this is completely separate from non-UNFCCC mechanisms. So let's understand about Article 6 a little bit in detail. It's very simple. First is Article 6.2, which is a completely market-based mechanism, because here there is no intermediary or no brokerage being done by UNFCCC. UNFCCC has nothing to do with this. What they do is, two countries, let's say in this case it could be India and Japan, they decide to have an agreement that, okay, they will set up a renewable energy park or solar energy park in India. Under Article 6.2, India will generate certain carbon credits, right? And these carbon credits will be transferred to Japan in the form of ITMOs, that is internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, which is nothing but sort of carbon credits. The terminology is different so that you know the mechanism is under 6.2. So internationally transferable mitigation outcomes are given to Japan, and corresponding adjustments, that means because we gave some credits to Japan, we cannot claim that in our NDC. So we have to subtract it from our NDC, and Japan will add it to its NDC because Japan is paying for it in money or financial support. This is Article 6.2, and this is a completely market-based mechanism because there is no intermediary. The advantage of this process is this is fast, this is flexible, there is no rule making coming from UNFCCC, and there is no single global market. Two countries decide to have an agreement, and this can happen at a very faster pace. The next is Article 6.4. Article 6.4 is similar to 6.2 in the sense that yes, there is a host country and there is a buyer country which is buying credits from the host country, but here the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change acts as like a stockbroker, as if it has its own stock exchange. So all the rules of negotiations here are determined by UNFCCC. In fact, the projects also, for example, the solar park, has to be verified by the United Nations agencies. And this is what makes this process a little more cumbersome and slow. But what is the advantage of this process? The advantage is sometimes in a bilateral deal, let's say if a developed country is negotiating with a developing country, maybe a very small poor nation, it has an upper hand. And in such case, it can tweak the details, or rather the way the deal is being done to its advantage. So smaller countries can prefer this route because there is the oversight of UNFCCC, and they will get a fair share of their deal in such transactions. This is considered both market and non-market based. Why? Market because yes, there is transaction taking place again between two countries, but non-market because one, this is not completely independent of a regulator. You have UNFCCC which is also brokering the deals. Second reason is some proceeds, that is a particular percentage of the money generated from these transactions actually goes towards the adaptation fund. Adaptation fund of the UNFCCC, okay? So the money is also going to some other fund, which is why it is not completely market driven or market based. And also this mechanism is helping countries achieve the total emission reduction targets, which is why it is also not completely just profit driven or just buying and selling. And the third article, which is Article 6.8, deals with non-market mechanisms. Non-market means here there is no strict buying and selling of carbon credits taking place. Developed countries will help developing countries in the form of, let's say, capacity building, technical support, policy support, all other non-tangible forms of so-called support. And that is why this is a completely non-market based mechanism. So these were the details of Paris Agreement, and rather Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. That, I hope this has helped you understand things a little bit. But now the question is, who is spending actually the most amount of money? If you see this diagram, the countries that gave most of the funding in 22 include Japan, US, Germany, France, and other countries. And money, where is it going? The money is primarily, majority of the money is going to developing nations, and maybe a lesser amount is going to the poorest nations. And the format in which the money is being given, which is very, very important, is primarily in the form of non-concessional loans, concessional loans, and other unclassified loans. Grants that you can see is a very small proportion of this entire deal. Which means what? Developing countries says, we asked for money, you are giving us loans, that means you expect us to pay you back. And developed countries says, well, at least you are getting loans to achieve your targets. So this is the rift between the developed world and the developing world. And another sticking point that is majorly coming up now in negotiations is that most of the money is going towards mitigation projects. For example, setting up a new solar park, right? For example, electric vehicles. Now, these are profit-making ventures. Eventually, the donor country might start earning money out of it, which is why the loans component, okay? And adaptation means that venture is not going to give you any returns or profit. For example, building a seawall. For example, changing the climate cropping patterns. Those things do not give profit in the long term, and which is why there is a huge outcry that now money should be diverted towards adaptation and loss and damage, not just mitigation. Finally, the numbers that we few talked about. So what is the total needs of the developing countries? The total needs of the developing countries is currently about $1.3 trillion of external funding is what we will require by 2035 at least. We require $1.3 trillion of external funding every year. About 1.9 trillion money will come from domestic sources, but this is the need of the developing countries. And where did the new quantified collective goal come from? Earlier, the developed countries were saying, till 2025, we are giving you $100 billion every year. And now that target has been increased to $300 billion every year in the Baku COP. If we break down this number, 300 billion, how is it coming? Domestic sources gone, because that is how each country will spend on its own country. But private capital will again play a major role. These $300 billion will come from bilateral negotiations between countries, could come from multilateral institutions, and a little bit of leveraged private capital. Rest of the money that has to come from external funding sources will come from international taxes, a rise in the capital of these multilateral development banks, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, their capital will also rise with time, and of course, innovation in technology. So all in all, what we have understood with climate negotiations and all these important factors is that climate negotiation or climate finance is not a charity that the developed world is doing for the developing world. In fact, it is a shared investment for a livable future, because climate change anywhere impacts everyone, everywhere. On that note, thank you very much. I hope the topic of climate finance is relatively clearer and better understood to you. Thank you so much.